per usual, we're just enjoying our technical issues. Ah, yes, it's a Saturday. Um, okay, so hallelujah. Thank you, Ms. Linda, for being our navigation angel. I really appreciate you. This is my dear friend, Linda Coulter-Burge. She is a psychic and conscious business coach. Thank you. Welcome, Linda.
Hello, everybody. Tech support person. I am no longer.
She's our tech by default, but you're doing great.
But I did a hardcore dump when I left HP years ago. So
that sounds personal. That sounds like TMI.
it does.
So let's talk to our guest, Tom Barnett. Welcome, Tom Barnett from Australia. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Kat. Good to be here.
And I wanted to let everybody know that Jillian is our engagement gal. So she's on the YouTube live stream. And so she will be there for people's questions, and she will let us know. She'll just chat us people's questions as they show up and come in. And then I also wanted to let everybody know we have a Facebook group. It is down in the description link below. We have got, we invite you to, we've got a thing called Coffee, Ko-Fi, Ko-Fi. If you want to like buy us a coffee to say thank you, we always appreciate that. Any financial giftings you feel inclined to do if you enjoy the show. And then also, of course, we invite people to like, share, subscribe, and to hit the notification bell so that way when things do go live, you actually you can see that you're being notified and you can join us at that moment. And I feel like there was one other, oh, and also I've got Tom's YouTube link down below as well. So Tom has his own YouTube channel. And if you didn't know that already, many of you probably already do know that, but it's there for you if you're new to Tom. And today we're going to be talking to Tom Barnett. We're pulling back the veil, because that's our thing, is we take a fresh look between the veils of reality. And we're looking at the veil of what it means to be sovereign in your body and what it means to be spiritually sovereign and how those two things show up. And Tom has kind of inadvertently found a platform to speak and share what he knows. Rather accidental, he made a video, it went viral because people were really resonating with his message. And we want to give Tom the opportunity to break down some of his story and some of his journey, because that really informs how he knows what he knows. So we're going to start with some preliminary questions for Tom. And I want to talk a little bit about your health journey first, Tom, because is it true that you know what? First, let's read his bio, for God's sake. That will also give people a good framework. So I'm going to read this real quick, and then we're going to talk about Tom's health journey and get more details about that. So Tom Barnett is a holistic health practitioner who studied conventional and alternative methods. Tom found most of what he learned to be theory only because when he was homeless and without, I skipped a line, sorry. Tom found most of what he learned to be theory only because when he was faced with his own health issues, he was forced to find real answers. Tom has lived homeless and without money and has always put an experience before material or monetary gain, which has given him many valuable lessons. Tom's main goal with a client or audience is to open avenues, new avenues of thought. And that's another thing we want to talk about. Before we started officially, we were chatting with Tom, and being homeless was something that was very liberating. It was something that was very eye-opening and, again, brought in that experience of personal sovereignty. But we'll wind our way into that one. First, let's talk to Tom about what was your health journey, Tom? What was your challenge that got you into exploring medicine in a really kind of visceral way?
Well, I always had a fascination with the body and the mind. So even from when I was young, I had a real fascination with science and I really started learning medicine at about age 14 or 15. I used to go to a local university after school and just sit in there in the library and start studying the books, and eventually started going and sitting in on some lectures and things when I was still in high school. So I already just had a fascination with the body. And then when I was in my early 20s, I got what people call chronic fatigue syndrome, which didn't know the actual cause until later down the track. But that's, no one could give me any answers. So all these people that I previously looked up to who thought that, who always told us that they knew everything, they all went quiet. And so, through a lot of lack of answers from people in, established roles, and also people I was paying a lot of money to, they were not giving me anything in return. So I had to dig a lot deeper than the average person has to dig in order to find, where true health and real answers really come from.
Well, what was your experience with chronic fatigue syndrome? Obviously, it means you didn't have any energy, but like you were being given answers and solutions that weren't working for you.
Yep.
What were your symptoms, and what did you find to actually be the root cause versus it kind of being, here's a label, chronic fatigue syndrome, doesn't really give you a lot of data. What was your granular view of that?
Well, the root cause always ends up being toxicity. So the body has exceeded its tolerance to a toxic load. That's on a physical sense. The rest of it, though, is very much an emotional, mental, spiritual imbalance, which just shows up in the physical body. So that's something that traditional medicine and a lot of the practitioners that I'd hired at the time just weren't going into that. Some were, but then it was overly simplistic and it wasn't taking a holistic approach to anything. And so that the main thing, though, is that what it's like to have chronic fatigue, which is a really broad term because it can encompass many different reasons that somebody might be like just fatigued, right? So it just means that you've been suppressed for more than 6 months, but it could be a number of different things. So for me, it was, the toxicity buildup combined with that imbalance in the higher bodies. And what it feels like is essentially having no life in you. It's like you've got a physical body and people think you look fine because you still look fit and everything else. But then it's like literally you feel like there is no life in the body. It's been sucked out. Like somebody's got a vacuum cleaner and literally sucked the life out of you, and you can't function. You're like a shell. You're literally a shell and trapped inside of it. And you can't express or create through the standard energy that a normal human being has.
And so this toxicity that you found to be the root cause, you were hearing that from the doctors. That was something that you gleaned on your own. Is that right?
Well, actually, funnily enough, one of the first people I saw was a German GP / naturopath. Like he was traditionally trained in Germany, and he was naturally trained as well. And he told me when I first went to see him that chronic fatigue is chronic toxicity. But the therapies he was giving we did like intravenous vitamin C, we did ozone therapy, a couple of things that were like energetic therapies that he was giving, but they weren't really doing much because I wasn't addressing anything that was leading to the reasons that I burnt myself out or anything like that. And also from my own experience, that doesn't compare to food either. It doesn't matter how many machines you go on. For example, I've known quite a few people from around here who have saved up or got donations to get $30,000 together to go overseas and get intravenous this and that and go on these fancy machines and come back worse than when they left, because it's not the machines and those sorts of therapies aren't the answer. They can help in some cases, but unless the food is right, the lifestyle and the thoughts are right, then there's not going to be a healing take place.
All right, let's have a quick Snapchat. Let's have a quick snapshot of you before you got to that healing crisis. Were you working like crazy? Were you just eating like junk food? What was your life before the chronic fatigue said, whoa, 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 full stop?
Well, funnily enough, I'd already got, okay, I'll go back a bit because when I was a kid, when I was like 8 to 12, 13, I was competing in I had a national ranking in tennis as a junior. I was running cross country. I had a good sporting kind of background. And then when I became a teenager, I was very, all the anger and things that had led up through my childhood for the things that I knew weren't right, but couldn't understand or couldn't emotionally or physically defend myself from. I think that just came to a point where all my hormones came through and I became really rebellious. So I threw all that in and I purposely got unhealthy. I started working when I was 14. So then it meant I could eat whatever I want. So I would drink 3 liters of Coca-Cola a day. I didn't have to eat any good food. I could buy McDonald's whenever I wanted. So I would do that. My part of me that was not happy and was really angry was projecting in these ways. And it came out in a way that was just I was destroying myself as a result. So I got to a stage where I was getting quite unhealthy. Like I put on weight on purpose. I wanted to see how fat I could get. I didn't get like massively fat because my frame won't hold it. But at the same time, coming through the mid stage of high school, I was actually getting pains and things in my stomach and bowel that were really intense. And I just knew that wasn't right. So I thought, okay, I've got to throw this in. So I'm going to get healthy again. So what happens though is that when you just get an interest in health, you go to what's, the readily available information. And the readily available information is not the right information. So I went on a low fat diet. I went on, I was eating a lot of processed foods that were like sold to us as this is a healthy food, but it's all processed. It's manufactured stuff and the low fat. And so by the time I was 19, I was, really lean, really fit looking, competing in sports again. I was doing triathlon, martial arts, and couple other sports. Actually, by 21, I'd taken up weightlifting and things as well. But anyway, to answer your question, Kat, what happened was that I was training 25 hours a week. I was working on a business for about 50 something hours a week and really, really out of balance. Didn't have a girlfriend, even at that time, never had one by 21. I was really just focused on being the best that I could be at something, but I was running from something. That's what all that was driving it was. And I didn't know it back then. So I was not having social time, not having relaxed time. Everything was focused around work, training, competing. That was it. And so really out of balance. And despite having an avid interest in health and the body, I was not eating healthily. I thought I was, but that was only with the information that I had at hand, and turned out to be all complete nonsense that led me to a health condition. So I was about 23 years of age, I got the chronic fatigue.
Okay. Yeah, you were following what was marketed as good health. Like this is the marketing around products to be sold that are called health products, whether they have any genuine connection to them or not. So then around 23, you come into this sort of like, I've got to go to a different route. I've got to do something deeper, better, wider. And this puts you on your own path of research.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. So what happened is so by 23, 24, I'd already been through college and dropped out. And I had I'd still had contacts and professors that I used to be taught by and all these sorts of things. And I went back to everybody. I went back to some of the boxing coaches. I went back to professors. I went back to, family friends who were well-respected doctors. And none of them could offer me an answer. And then a lot of them, same as when I was in college, got agitated at me asking questions. And I'm thinking, what's wrong with this? Why can't I ask questions? Why can't I question your answers? Because they're obviously they're not giving me any results. And so that led me to go, okay, well, no one's helping. My family doesn't even believe me that they think I'm making it up. And the doctors think I'm making it up because they can't give me answers. So I'm thinking, well, I've got to find, I know the answers are there. There's no such thing as I'm not going to be like this forever. So I just knew that there were answers out there. And only when somebody is desperate enough will they actually find, it's like only when we have a need to become self-sufficient or self-aware will we do that. The amount of people everybody keeps talking about, why doesn't everybody wake up in the world? Well, a lot of them don't have a need yet. So for me, it was a need. I had to find answers. So that's when I found Google doesn't give the answers. Wikipedia doesn't give the answers. Your doctor doesn't give the answers. And you really have to find them. So that means you have to find alternative methods of learning, and you have to learn how to research. You can't just go to a book and assume that the book is right, because through your own experiences, you realize that some of it might be right, but it's only a piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire story. So then, this is what led me down the path of alternative research and finding through other people who had also gone through similar paths, who was really walking the walk. And that's when I found people like Paul Chek, who I learned a lot from, Rudolf Steiner, who I learned a lot from about the, terrain theory and how viruses really work and things like that. And then that led me. So one of the pivotal moments, I guess, related to the videos that I put out was that if you wanted to find out about germs and bacteria and viruses, you find out, if you just do standard research, you find out about germ theory, which was Louis Pasteur's theory. And then if you dig deeper, though, you find out about his contemporary, Antoine Béchamp, who had a much different idea of how things worked. but only one made it to the mainstream and the other didn't. And so then you start to go, well, if you're only looking for answers and you only know how to find what's put in front of you, you're going to find germ theory. It's only when you start going, but does that really work that way? How does it work? It's not a reflection of how my experiences are showing me how things work. So then you have to go deeper. Then you find, oh, there's all these other doctors and researchers who were around at the time. How come we never heard about them? So then you start looking into their works. But that takes effort, right? You had to find that. It wasn't just given to you. And humans, as we fall into the ego trait most of the time, we take what's convenient. That's why, it just explains everything in the world. So we go to convenience and ease and comfort. So if it's given to us, it's just too easy to take that. And then that's the answer, right? We don't have to look any further. But when you get really sick, you really have to look. So some of the most well-researched people are actually the ones that lost their health because they had to find the answers. It's literally, for some people, it's life and death. The establishment does not give them the answer. If they choose to live, which a lot of people do, if they really choose to live on a deep level, they find answers. So they're the types of people traditionally that it's good to go and get information from, because they've done all the research that most people will never do because they don't have the need to do it.
And also it is that suppression of the people who, and I can't remember the name of the doctor. I watched this documentary called Beautiful Truth, and it features this doctor who found how to get rid of cancer. And it's like these, very practical, easy, not crazy steps. And the people who, followed this routine with diet and whatever else is part of this, again, I'm not remembering the name, but it's in Beautiful Truth documentary. Like they had recovery, but this man's information was stolen. It was suppressed. He was discredited because there's an industry there that's here to support itself. Industries that are there to support themselves. So that gives us a good framework in terms of your catalyst point, your point of transformation. And we'll pick up back to that thread, but I also wanted to include, what was your homelessness journey in terms of it? That was the sense I just get of that. It was that this was like, enough of that, F that, I'm going to do it my way. And it was another moment of you being unconventional and breaking the norm in order to break out. But you speak to that. What's true for you?
Yeah, well, there's a strong element of truth in that. So one of the things that when we are a little different just by nature anyway, there's when we're developing the ego actually likes that, because different often means better than. So when you don't feel that you fit in, quite often the recoil of that is you need to feel that if you don't fit in, you can feel inferior. So that recoil is to want to feel superior, and different in a lot of ways to the ego can mean superior or better than. So yeah, I definitely did do things that were different on purpose so that I could be seen as, to myself, as probably better than, others. So yeah, I think you nailed that one. But as far as being homeless, that was a choice, because I could always have gone back and lived with my parents. And I did when I was 24 or 25, I did. And it just didn't work because they didn't really accept me. And I'd rather be on the street than be in a house where somebody doesn't really want me there, even though I've got the comforts of the house. So I chose to just go out on my own. And I'm really glad that I did, because the experiences within that of being self-sufficient, even in that state, it taught me a lot about being provided for. And that as long as you're open to being provided for, you always will be. You might not know what it's going to be. It's not like The Secret where you go, oh, I'm going to have a Ferrari, and then tomorrow a Ferrari will turn up. It's like you just trust that the provision will be there, and you have to be open to the opportunities. Otherwise, you won't find them or see them or take them up when they're there. So I got offered housing. I never went hungry. I did go hungry a few times, but just in general, I didn't go hungry. I'll tell you what, though, the difference between me and people who often are like what you might call genuinely homeless is that I was still relatively functioning. Like I could shave every day. I could still speak well. I didn't smell of urine and those sorts of things. Like there are people who are really down and out, addicted to drugs. They're not going to have the same experience that I did, because then I could still walk through, for example, most of the time I spent homeless was on the Gold Coast, in Queensland on the eastern seaboard of Australia, and it's a coastal town. It's a tourist town, and I spent most time around Surfers Paradise, which is the main tourist area. Now, there's a lot of homeless people around there. But see, what I could do is that I could walk into a hotel and carry myself like I was a guest. So I'd walk in the mornings to the most expensive ones, have a swim in the massive lagoon pool, have a sauna, have a shower, shave. Then I would go and sit at the restaurant and I would just mill around. Not like I wasn't meant to be there. I would just mill around like I was supposed to be there. And when people would get up from their tables, often leaving half their meals, I'd just slide into the table. I'd give a wave to the people next to me like I was meant to be there because I didn't look homeless, you know. I could still have a clean shirt on or something, you know. And so I just made the most of the opportunities that were there. And that's how I didn't go hungry, was that I was just getting a lot of restaurant food. And with the little money that I did get together, I was buying, you know, clean foods from the health food store and the farmers markets. But, you know, I just made, but it doesn't mean that internally I wasn't in pain. You know, sometimes it was actually fun. I was like, hey, this is a millionaire lifestyle right here. But there was a lot of, you know, not feeling worthy of it, not being able to enjoy it to its fullest extent because the energy's not there. And, you know, a lot of aspects like that. But overall, I've done, I think, 4 or 5 stints of homelessness, some for long periods. And that was purely by choice, and where I'd put a tent out in not even remote places, just in the bushes by the beach around here, for example, or on top of a mountain on the Gold Coast where I went. And I lived there for eight months at a time. And that was for a solitude way of life. And being able to show to myself that I could do that, and also just to show to others, because people think, hey, you can't do that. That's a common phrase. No, you can't do that. You couldn't survive. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. And because I'd gone back to college in one of those stages, I was living off a college income, and a college income is the equivalent of welfare. It's a minimal amount of money. I think it was 280 Australian dollars a week. But out of that, I could give myself organic food. I could, you know, I could live okay. I could live really well, actually, to be honest. Now, that's different to having a family, right? I don't have 5 kids to support. But at the same time, people still say that's not possible. You can't live off that little amount of money. You can't live well. You can't be happy. But I wanted to show people, as much to myself, that you really can. And so that was another element of making that conscious choice of being homeless on several occasions.
Well, I think that what you're bringing up is really important right now because, you know, in the United States, we have a huge transfer of wealth going on. And we are going to have a lot more people who are homeless, not by choice, but because that's what's happening in our system right now. And we already do have, I think people would be really really surprised how many people we have here that are homeless, that are working 1 and 2 jobs, but living in their car because they can't afford to have actual rent here. And so one of the things you bring up, I knew someone in my 20s that I had no idea was homeless, lived in her car, but presented herself every day completely made to the hilt, like she was a representative to teach people how to have great body image. And then I find out a year later, she's been doing this the entire time, living in her car. And so a lot of that is persistence and how you look at that journey. I truly believe, and whether you have support within the universe, whether you reach out for that support, and community, and be creative and persistent. And so it sounds like you were able to tap into those resources during your journey.
Yeah, and it sounds like to me like that is kind of your nature, is to be defiant. Like you're probably a fire sign. You're probably a Leo with an Aries rising. Like I feel like you have a lot of fire. And I think that this speaks to your desire to say, this is mine. I mean, sovereignty is a word that keeps coming up when I talk with you. It's like, this is mine, I'm going to own it. You can't tell me how I can do what I can do. And yeah, in that process, you were early 20s, which is so much the time of doing everything, you know, quote unquote wrong, because that's where you're figuring out who you are and what your boundaries are, what's real for you. And you were able to have these millionaire moments, but yeah, your internal stuff still hadn't been resolved, but you were embarking on that. During this time, were you embarking on your health resolution journey at that point when you were 24?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. And yeah, I am a Leo with a Aries something.
Nailed it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was. That was part of the journey there. It was always there. Like I said, even from when I was a little kid, I've had that fascination. So I've always been soaking up information regarding health, the body, the mind, how it all comes together, how it functions. And so yeah, it was a big part of the journey at that time. But you know, Linda, I was living in a car in several stages then as well, even before that. And you know, part of my training in the mornings, I'd do lap swimming and I'd sleep near a public pool. And in my mind, I was rich because I'd wake up in the boot of my car and then I woke up to a 50-meter Olympic pool. So, you know, it's like, who has an Olympic pool in their front yard? That's like billionaires. So, you know, I never felt like I was poor or being like hard done by living in a car. And I lived in a car several times as well, out of choice, but also out of necessity because, yeah, I couldn't afford rent and things too. But realistically, I think as well, a lot of us that do that, we are doing it by choice because realistically, you could do a share room with someone. You could maybe only have to pay $30 a week rent if you shared with 3 people in a bedroom, for example. But then people like me go, don't want to do that. I want to be on my own. So it's not like there's no choice. It's just we make the choices that we make because there's always some other, you know, you could share rooms. And the thing about being homeless is, you're right, it does form community because when you are homeless and you're sleeping in like certain parking lots or certain parts of a park, you just get to know the other people that are there and everybody's like, you know, on the same, might share some food, share some stories and whatever. And then there is a shared network of what resources are available. Hey, I noticed you were over there the other day. That's actually not a good spot because of whatever reason. Did you know there's more warmth or whatever over here? And so, and people do help each other out. Yeah, there's also people that get possessive and territorial, but there's also community within those networks as well.
That is so powerful. And yeah, I think that piece of the difference is, and like Linda was saying, well, you're both were saying this, it's like how you approach it. And in our current culture in the United States, there's so much financial devastation going on because of the pandemic and how it's being dealt with, you know, in terms of why. And I think a lot of that's, you know, completely manufactured in terms of the responses could have been so much better. The caretaking for the citizens could have been so much better. The apathy speaks volumes to what our nation, our government's really about. But like, there are people that with my day job that I'm dealing with, a lot of people who are having these challenges. And they're like, well, I just lost my home and now I'm in my car. If I don't get my, you know, this financial support from the government soon, I'm going to lose my car. And so they're being really confronted with something that they had never expected in their life versus you who are like, you know, like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it my way. And this is for me. I'm choosing it. But it gives an example of a difference in mindset that could get somebody through something versus it destroying them.
Yeah, it's all most people know that since the beginning. You know, it's in every spiritual and religious text. It is about creating heaven or hell between your own ears. You know, and but one thing I think it's important for people to realize, since you guys talk a lot about, you know, the spiritual side of things, and which is essentially the responsibility side of things, is that we often create that anyway. So when people say, oh no, I'm going to lose my house, and then, oh no, I'm going to lose my car, they don't actually realize that they've created that in the first place, because it was never going to be a sustainable lifelong thing to have all those things. So when we came through from indigenous times, which is the cultures that we're systemically still trying to wipe out, they never had those things, but they had everything available. They never went homeless, or I mean, you know, technically they did, but you know what I mean? It's not like they had this system that they relied on, which if you look at the system from the outside in, you look at it and go, well, of course you're going to lose things because it's set up to fail. It's not actually set up to help you be prosperous and succeed. It's set up to help to make you think you can have things that are going to fulfill you, and then they get taken away and then you feel worse, but they were always going to be taken away in one way or another. It was always going to fail. So for me, I've never got into debt. I don't think debt is and to the point, if you've ever taken out a credit card, a mortgage, or a personal loan, you've actually created the collapse that we're currently starting to see, because the money is only created by your signature. It's called securitization. So all these banks and things that make the prices of housing and everything else go through the roof, that's because we created it by saying, I want more than I can have now. So we're always on borrowed time and borrowed energy, which is always finite. It has to fail at some point. So it is just important to realize that we do create these things, on a fundamental deep level, we create them. So until we realize that, we'll always be surprised that we're getting the rough end of the stick, and we'll always run into the same problems in the future if we don't realize how much of it we actually bought into. Like, we were given the story, we were given the framework, but we still played our roles. So that's kind of how it's.
Again, it was like you said earlier, to what you said earlier with, it's an agreement to what's easy. It's like, well, this is what's given to me. It's what's convenient. It's what is in front of my face. It's easier to say yes than push against it and do something different.
That's right. Yep. It's exactly right. And we're only offered a way, and we take that way that's easy, convenient, and is just offered to us. We don't think, well, that's an offer, so I'll consider it as an offer. Because everything in the world, because we live in a world of commerce, it works on offers and acceptance. So what we'll do, we're offered, and then we just take them. So we think that these powers that be are the dark forces and they're evil entities and things. And hey, maybe they are some form of darkness and evil, but at the same time, they only offered and we accepted. They didn't hold guns to our head and said, you must do it this way, because they also know how the universal principles work, which is that you have to give disclosure and you can only offer. It's not up to them to tell us the rules, really. They still offered and we accepted. And so we co-created the world that we currently live in and the system that we live in, which can have a huge disparity in wealth, where some people are living in multi-million-dollar beach houses and other people do not have a roof over their head, despite having equal or maybe greater value to offer to the community based on who they are, their skill set, and what they can offer to the world. Quite often, the ones that have those multi-million-dollar houses, they get them off of destruction and not giving something of true value to the world. And those that have, the amount of people, Linda, that I know are psychic that have great abilities and they struggle to make $400 a week, And then you have people making $400 a minute writing blogs about nonsense, and the people that they run off destruction. It's taking from something. That's where the wealth comes from. So that's the system that we all co-created. And until we come to that realization and take responsibility for it, we're only going to run into another one. If this current system collapses, or some fancy president comes along and people go, this is the answer, or the reset that's going to happen on the 21st, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if we cannot take responsibility for ourselves, someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to say, well, I can provide that. And then they'll create a new system that people will just fall into. It's like, it's a different spinning wheel. Okay, well, that one's done. Let's go on this spinning wheel. But they're not behind, you know what I mean? So it's really important, I think, for people to realize that if we do want to see a better world, we have to create it. And it comes from who we are. And it's never ever going to come from a leader or a product or, something outside of ourselves.
Yeah, I completely I agree with that. When people are trying to say this political party over that political party, I'm like, no, the whole political system is built vampirically by design with intention. It's not going to save anybody. You're just saying who you're getting to pick your abuser. You're not really getting to pick change. So go ahead, Linda, you got a question?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to bring up, we had early on when we were talking about some of your health issues, I do want to bring up that we've got some questions that I saw coming in. So at some point when it's convenient, I'll have Jillian pop on and bring in some of those questions, keeping in mind that we're not doctors, we can't say cures, all of those things, but perhaps there's some advice in there that Tom would be willing to give.
And can Jillian put the questions into our chat and we can just do it that way?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, that might be a little
Yeah.
smoother. We'll bring Jillian on, which will be delightful if need be, but if we can get him popped in more.
Yeah.
So then let's switch gears here, Tom. And I wanted to talk about, because the whole thing that you did that got people turning to your energy. Well, one thing is because you also have radiant energy. You're somebody who radiates. And so people are going to be attracted to that. But like you were kind of breaking down how viruses work. And obviously there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of really hot emotions, very sensitive emotions around this and around what's true, what's real. And so we're wanting to just get your understanding of how viruses work, and how do you know that, and what do people need to be aware of? Because again, we want to empower people. We're not trying to say you're wrong because you believe XYZ and it's crazy that you believe XYZ. We're not doing that. We're having a very heart connected conversation, and we want you to talk about what you know about the nature of viruses, and then like tug at it to get more clarity. And then, finally, we really do want to talk about sovereignty of the body, and how the body is just this amazing machine that produces organic machine that can produce all these chemicals that we don't even know how to access because the instruction manual has been dismantled and taken away, and we want to get back to that. But talk to us, Tom, about what you understand, how viruses work, and how that looks in this current state of the big C19.
Sure. So I think to start with, the premise that you just gave of empowerment is huge. That's the underlying principle. And I think anybody that this information might be new to should hold that in their mind the whole time, because the premise for me is, if we create these things ourselves, does that not give us full control over how we operate, how healthy we can be? If we take the mindset that we're susceptible to outside invasion and there's nothing we can do about it and nature's out to kill us, does that empower us or disempower us? So my question is whether or not you're going to believe what I will give you now. My question is, what empowers you more? Knowing that you have responsibility and you can change how you resonate and how you present into the world, your health, or that your health is at the mercy, like you're a plastic bag blowing around in the breeze. And if it blows from the south, you have to blow that way. And if it blows from the north, you have to blow that way. Like, which is more empowering? So my understanding of viruses is that they are created as an internal response to external, what would you call it? Essentially just a stimulus, any kind of stimulus. So the body, the way people knew it for centuries, remembering that germ theory is little over 100 and something years old. Terrain theory is what people knew even in established science and medicine for centuries. Before that, it was indigenous cultures that knew that the way the body operates is in a direct symbiosis and sync with nature. So nature's not out to kill us. We are made from everything that nature is made from, with the same force of life that runs through all things, which has its own intelligence. It knows what to do. So the challenge of life is that we also get what's called an ego. And so an ego has mechanisms by which it needs to feel safety and security. And it also needs to, it's essentially like a smaller version of us. The higher self we could call a bigger version, and the ego we could call a smaller version. So that's always open. It's very susceptible to fears. So what will threaten my immediate safety and security? So what that means is that we can, at times, if we get too caught up in the mind, which is very powerful but has a dead end, then we can often create our own, like we were talking about before, we can create our own heaven and hell, but we can also create dysfunction in the body. So when indigenous cultures always knew that they had a symbiosis with nature, they had an inherent trust in nature. And when they lived in symbiosis with nature, they knew that they were in vibrant health. Even if there were poisonous animals around, it didn't matter because they were in sync with that. So what happens is, as we got more industrialized, more toxicity was put into the environment. Also, with that industrialization came a more of a bent towards that ego, which craves safety, security, and control in the environment. So things become gradually more stressful and also take us away from our essential self and our essential nature. So when we create an imbalance, like with my own story, anyone listening to that earlier would know I was highly imbalanced, right? Like, who goes and does things to that degree while neglecting what most people consider core values: family, friends, relationships, leisure time, hobbies, those sorts of things. I was neglecting all of those. So I got really out of balance and I got really sick. So it's not, this is the way that things work. We can go into that more later if you like, the relationship. But basically, we're moving away from that nature and balance. So the way nature works is that it's not out to kill us. It's actually always there to support us, but it's also a teacher. Now, we might die from nature, but that was our teacher. We might get sick or in pain, but that is the pain teacher that we're meeting. It's not a random demise or a random curse from God or nature. That's a teacher. We're supposed to learn from it. But our minds and our ego has the ability to take the lesson or to throw that lesson away and say, I got hard done by. Nature is out to kill me. So the way nature does this is that our bodies are more bacterial, viral, fungal, protozoan, parasitic DNA than it is human DNA. We're actually more critters than we are human. That makes up
that's our biome, right? Like that you're talking about,
yeah.
Our biome. So I think talk about the biome for a minute so people understand that it will help translate, because we're cohabitating with our biome, which is filled with all of these other organisms, which is nature. So speak on that a little bit and help that.
Yeah, so that's actually our first line of defense. So when people are out hand sanitizing, for example, trying to kill germs, what they're doing is they're actually taking away the first line of defense, which is the bacteria that are present on every surface of our body: eyelids, eyeballs, all of our hands especially. Japanese actually roll sushi in a particular part of their palm because it has a specific bacteria there. It aids the flavor of the food. Like, ancient and indigenous cultures know about this whole biome thing. So we have it on our skin, we have it in our mouth, we have it in our gut. Those are the primary biomes that we have. So these are first of all, they're a protection. They're also an information gatherer. They bring in and give off information. So give in and bring in to what or whom or where? Well, generally it's with the environment, because there's bacteria in other animals, plants, soil, and other people. So what's called, I think the term is quorum sensing. It's where bacteria speak to each other, and from quite a distance too. So that means that what you are, if we're even from remote like this, especially someone that's sensitive like you could feel me quite strongly. So normally though, for most people, it's when you're in a room, and everyone knows that, because if someone's in a room with them and they're really pissed off or they're really moody, you can feel it. You don't need them to tell you you're in a bad mood. You can feel it. Likewise, if they're happy and they're really happy to be around you, you can feel it. Everybody knows that. You feel it primarily in the gut, really. That's where the bacteria, but it's also in the skin. The immune systems talk to each other as well, and the immune system is primarily in the gut as well. So we're talking about the biomes that connect to and have a direct dialogue all of the time with nature and everything around us, and within our own body. Our cells talk to each other all the time. So what happens is that's mostly bacterial. There's also a lot of fungal, and everybody should know by now about the magnificence of fungus, the way fungus communicates throughout the soil, and are you familiar with that?
A wee bit.
And the way trees talk to each other, the way they know what's coming, the way it's fascinating. If people haven't looked up that, I think there's a book. I actually forget the name of the book. It's like the Amazing Life of Trees or something like that.
Oh, The Secret Life of Trees.
Secret Life of Trees, that one, yeah. Yeah, if anyone's not familiar with that, they should check that out and start getting an idea of how these networks that run underground all talk to each other. Huge communication there. So this is happening with us too, and between us, within and between us. So if the body is not breaking down cells optimally, because that's what our body is always doing, it's regenerating. So if we're not breaking down and clearing out dead matter, which is first of all cells that just die off by nature, we grow a new body every 7 years or so. Also by metabolic dysfunction, something in the body, the cell metabolism isn't working properly. It's creating too much lactic acid. It's not creating ATP properly or utilizing oxygen properly, or we've taken in some kind of chemical toxin, or our thoughts have just gone toxic. So we all know how that works. We get negative emotions. We feel it in the body. We can create toxic chemicals in the body by our thoughts and emotions. So all these things together create residues in the body. They have to be cleaned out. Now, our body doesn't do that by itself. That's why we have, first of all, enzymes. And enzymes just speed up the process. They're like a lock and key mechanism that speed up any process in the body. But what really does the job are the janitors. And the janitors are fungus, parasites, and bacteria. Now, fungus, parasites, and bacteria are living organisms. They have a reproductive cycle. They have a digestive system and basically a nervous system as well, and a nucleus, a cell nucleus. So they're a living organism, which means that they can also die. And they do die off periodically. That's why we get, cycles in the body that's based on bacterial and fungal die-off, as well as parasitic die-off as well. They'll always go through their life cycles. So what happens is they are very, very efficient. A bacteria, and particularly a parasite, can take, let's say we use a metric term. Let's say we have 5 kilograms or 10 pounds of waste. A parasite can take that 10 pounds of waste and turn it into around about 2 pounds of waste. So it's highly efficient. So it can take something this big and turn it into that big. And then it just excretes. So that's a really efficient cleaning and janitorial mechanism or organism. But what happens is that it's living. And so if by doing that function, it essentially becomes too toxic for itself, or it dies off, or it's too hard work for it, it's going to die, and then that work can't be done. So this is where viruses come in. A virus is not a living organism. A virus is essentially just fragments of DNA and RNA with a bit of fat around it. It doesn't have a digestive system. It doesn't have a respiratory or a circulatory system, and it doesn't have a cell nucleus. So by any scientific or medical definition, it is not a living thing, therefore cannot be killed. So what happens is, because it is essentially just fragments of DNA, RNA, and fat, and it's not living, what it does is it has the action of a solvent, and a solvent is essentially just a dissolving or a cleaning agent. So that's what fungus, parasites, and bacteria do as well. Remember, they can break down a large amount of waste to a small amount, which makes it easier for the body to clean out dead matter and decaying matter. Now, when it can't do that because it gets killed in the process, a virus has to be created. It's like the heavy hitter. And a virus can't be killed. It can clean down the most toxic of agents, but because it's not living, it can't be killed. It only performs its function. Within the body, we can create around 300, I forget the exact number, between 320 and 350,000 different types of viruses that are all specific to the cell tissue. So something that is produced by lung tissue won't be produced by heart or brain or kidney tissue. It's all specific to the tissue in the body. So being a cleaning agent, that's essentially their role. So then you say, well, why do I need to clean? Why does your house need to clean? Why does your car need to clean? Well, it got dirty. And how does it get dirty? Well, hey, maybe it was just environmental. Maybe it was a big flood came through. Now your car's trashed and you have to clean it out. But maybe it's just because you weren't cleaning it out. You have McDonald's in your car every day. You smoke in your car and you just never clean it. So it gets dirty and it needs a clean. So that's essentially what we do. Remember that anything that we get in the body is a response to a stimulus. So that stimulus might be, hey, we just trash our body. We don't eat right, drink right, we don't sleep right, or think right. We trash it. Or maybe we don't do any of those things, but we're hanging around a lot of radiation. Radiation trauma creates trauma in the cell. It creates die-off and it creates a non-functioning environment. You're going to have to create something. You'll get a bacterial, fungal, or parasitic infection. If you don't get that, or it doesn't work, you'll get a viral infection. It's what you need to help clean away that. Otherwise, what you get is tumors and cancers. That's the next step. So a cancer is really what you get when that dead tissue cannot be taken away. It can't be broken down. So what the body does is it forms a tumor around it, which is essentially protecting the rest of the body. That's what it does. But then when it becomes mutated and things like that, that's when you get cancers that spread around the body. But it's only because it's not able to break down its own dead and decaying and dying off cell tissue. That's basically all it is. So nature has these a triage of what it does. It doesn't just whack you over the head with a cancer. It just goes, hey, buddy, you're not really listening to me. So here's a sickness. Hey, buddy, you're still not listening. Here's this. Hey, buddy, look, you're really not listening. Here's a cancer. And if you're really not listening, hey, maybe, you're just choosing to leave this earth prematurely. So then that's what you're choosing. But then it's like anything, we're always getting subtle taps on the shoulder as a guidance. And when we don't listen, something else comes along. First of all, it's a tap, then it's a shove, then it's a baseball bat over the head, and then it's a car accident. You wrap yourself around a tree. You may pass from that, or you may survive it, and you're supposed to learn from it, but sometimes we just don't. So that's essentially what nature's doing with regards to our microbiome, viruses, and the way it all. Does that kind of give a picture of how it works? Because we can get more specific.
Sure. And I want to talk about how you can't get, so if viruses aren't living, then how do you get a virus infection? That's what I want to ask. And then let's hop into, because I know we got questions from Jillian and then also Linda, wave your hand. But if you can tell me just real quick, if it's a quick answer, it may not be, like, okay, how do you get a viral infection if viruses aren't living? Because you have a bacterial infection, but bacteria are living.
That's right. Yeah. Well, just because you need the clean out. Are you talking about within yourself, or as in transference from another person, or whatever we think viruses do?
Well, if you said, because you use the term viral infection, and so that's what made me get on that. Yeah. But maybe we should pause. Maybe we'll bookmark it, because that sounds like that's going to lead into the bigger talk about more of this. And I wanted to get.
Well, yeah, I shouldn't have used that word. I just used words in context because it's what people are used to hearing. But personally, I don't classify it as an infection. I just call it action. We experience viral action, because once that virus has run its course and it's done its job, it's not an infection is when you have, it really relates to living organisms, and an infection is a dysbiosis, which means there's too much or too little. So we always have fungus, parasites, and bacteria and viruses active in the body. They're always there. They're always functioning. But what happens is that they're in what's called a biosis, or a balance
homeostasis.
Point. Yeah, homeostasis, exactly. So what happens is that if we get, say, an influx of heavy metals, or something goes out in the body, we get overly stressed. What happens is that we kill off some of the good bacteria. The bacteria that are like bad, so to speak, that create too much acid, for example, will come up. So we have a dysbiosis. That balance, or that homeostasis, has been interrupted. Now that's classified as an infection because we have too many of a particular type of organism. But it's important to remember that those organisms are always there. E. coli, for example, or trichinosis. It's like, how many people think that those are the death knell of anybody? But those are in our body all of the time. Trichinosis is actually used to treat many illnesses, and E. coli actually feeds the brain and nervous system. If you have too little, a dysbiosis as in too little of E. coli, you won't be functioning well. You'll have symptoms of MS and a number of other symptoms, because E. coli feeds the brain and nervous system. Without it, you can't function. So people go, I don't want E. coli. But if you didn't have it, you wouldn't function. We always have all of these organisms that people are scared of, all of them, even the ones that are supposedly deadly and nasty, they're all in our body all of the time. It's only when they get into out of balance proportions that we class it as an infection. But at the same time, it's not an infection the way I see it. It's not like it is infecting us. It's just that we have an imbalance because we are imbalanced. It's just a representation, the external reflecting the internal.
Yeah, it's inside, not outside in. It's inside out.
Yep.
All right, baton to Miss Linda. Go, Miss Linda.
Okay, so this brings up lots of questions for me. So I do agree that we have, our bodies are internal ecosystems in and of itself. We have viruses, we have bacteria within us. It is, when they get out of alignment, when one overtakes and grows too much, when one dies off, that's when we start having to rebalance that within our bodies. And going through my own healing crisis, I had to do that. My question comes in when you see movement of a virus through populations, how that happens. So indigenous people in Brazil and in the rainforests were nearly wiped out. Some entire villages were wiped out because people went there with a common virus and didn't have symptoms. It was in their system, but they had no exposure to it prior because it was not in their ecology. So they had no way of fighting it. So that's one of those things of transferring that, looking at it at another level when it gets out of whack. So when you look at HIV and it goes through populations, it's not the HIV that was killing people. It was all of the additional things that were happening within their body that made them, the HIV made them susceptible to all those other things. It was the pneumonia, and it was the other things that were coming along, taking advantage of that compromised system. So my questions, a couple things, it's kind of leading into some of the questions that we have. When someone has a virus or is exposed to a virus in whatever way, we may or may not agree on how that happens, but they're dealing with it. So we have someone here that's talking about shingles. We've got some other things. So when that happens, are there things we can do to help bring that more into balance, to help our bodies?
I want to pull it back a little bit because you asked this big question.
I know, I have lots of them.
I know. I'm like, let me grab this one. Let me grab this one. So talking about viruses, how viruses work, because this has really helped educating us. So Linda had a great example. The indigenous culture that had never been exposed to this particular virus that was within the biomes of, white people. They're coming into their space and they pick up this virus. How did they pick up? If viruses are something that are in our biome, how did they pick up a virus, or how was it transmitted to them so that they actually experienced the negative effects of it because it was something that was not in alignment to how their body works? Does that make sense?
Okay. So this is probably the point where anyone listening has to really switch on their open mind mechanism, because this is where people can start feeling disempowered, because I'm going to tell you the way that works, but it may start feeling disempowering for people. The reason it might start feeling disempowering is that I'm going to tell you that that's not a natural phenomenon. That was a man-made phenomenon. And then that's going to trigger questions of like, why? Why would somebody do that on purpose? Okay. So I just need to pre-warn people that I just want you to keep an open mind. You don't have to believe what I say, but I do encourage you, if you want to find out how the world works and how our health works, you might need to do some alternative research and start finding answers for yourself, or not. You're more than welcome to believe anything you like. But what I'm going to tell you is that when indigenous cultures were so-called wiped out, that wasn't from any virus or anything like that. That was a complete colonization agenda to actually take out all of the members on Earth that actually have the greatest connection to nature and to Earth, and who actually know how the body works, how health works, and our connection to God and spirit and the land. That was a very definite and on purpose move. And the way they did that was partly with some chemicals and partly also with modern medicine, selling to them a godlike idea of being able to cure diseases and to also give health in a way that for some reason they were confused about. They already had health. I don't know why they took that, but I think the Bible and many other spiritual texts talk about the apple, anything that's a little bit kind of, well, maybe there is something more than what we have. It's like a, so anyway, the way that indigenous populations were mostly wiped out was through genocide. And then the way that diseases are introduced is through medications, specifically vaccines. So what happens is it is true that we have bacteria that may not be common to other people. For example, if you go to another country and you drink their water from their water supply, they're all fine, but you might get a bad belly for a day or two while you readjust, right? Like a lot of people know that. So that is an element where we are going into a different environment with some different microbiota, and we do have to adapt, but they don't kill us. It's an adaptation period, not a death period. So when indigenous cultures have been reduced by a large number, that's very much a man-made proposition. That's very much got to do with introducing man-made Western medications, specifically vaccines, as I say, but also some other medications, and mostly to do with hiding the real reasons for deaths. I'll just put it that way without getting too graphic about how some of this happened. So the way that a virus, though, can be transmitted through people is it can only seem like it's transmitted, because what happens is we all know of a flu season, for example, right? So then we can ask the question, well, what is a flu season? Why is it that a lot of people get it? Does one person get it and then transmit it to everyone? Doesn't sound very likely. What's more likely is that we go into a period of environmental status, and then what happens is our bodies recognize it. Remember, we were talking earlier that our bodies are constantly talking to the environment. It's like if you plant a seed, it just knows when to sprout or when to germinate based on water, temperature, sunlight, and everything else. There's a code in everything. So one of the things that can happen is that it gets to a certain point in the year, for example, or a season, and our bodies recognize that, like a bear knows, hey, it's time to hibernate now. It doesn't think it, it just knows it. Or birds know when to fly south. It's just an inbuilt mechanism that responds to nature. So that's why a large pocket of people in a specific area can all undergo a flu detoxification at the same time, because that is the body's trigger to start producing a virus. It's like, all right, it's cleaning time now, spring cleaning time, let's get to work. So that's why 500,000 people at once can get a flu. But if you take it from a transmissible perspective, wouldn't everybody on Earth get one? Because we're all connected very closely through one way or another. It's like when people say, well, what about herpes or, STDs? It's like, well, unless you're celibate, wouldn't we all have STDs? And there's plenty of incidences of people sleeping with somebody who does have, an infection of some sort, and they don't get it. So then you have to asking these sorts of questions. But specifically, Linda, how do people get viruses when a lot of people get them? It's because A, it's a communication with the environment, and B, it's a communication with each other. If our bodies think as in the intelligence in our body, that it's okay to undergo a clean out, then we'll all do it. It's like there's enough of us here, there's enough food around, or there's enough whatever. For whatever it is, our minds might not comprehend it, but the body knows. So it goes, okay, we can do this now. It's like, well, there's a lot of examples of that, but it's literally just that. It's knowing that it's okay to do it. It's our bodies talking to each other.
Okay, so in this context of it's flu season, I know like which is a good example, because it's that piece of one that you have the opportunity to build your immune system during flu season so that your detox doesn't have to end up being the flu. You can do a detox within your system without having to go into having a full flu symptom washout, right?
Well, a common cold is usually the first step. If a common cold isn't strong enough, then you'll get a flu. A flu is like a way worse version of a common cold. So a common cold has viral components. By the way, we all have coronaviruses in us, and that's a common cold. But a cold is a huge element of a bacterial detoxification. Bacteria, remember, are living. So if you snot in a tissue and then I lick the tissue and I get some of your bacteria, I could get a cold, but that's only a possibility, because the cold, the bacteria there that can actually also trigger a viral response, but the cold itself is literally just a cleaning agent. Now, if I don't need it, if my throat doesn't need to get sore, which is the clean out, I won't get it. And we've all had that experience too, being around somebody that's snotty, and we go, oh, geez, are you sick? You got a cold? And they go, oh, I don't want to pass it on, but we don't get the cold. Everybody's had that experience. Well, hopefully everyone's had that experience, but if you ask around, plenty of people have that experience of not getting the cold. It's because we don't need it. So the cold, when we get snotty and fluey, that's the end result. That's the last stage of the detoxification. That could have been going on for months or even years. If it's a bad flu, that could have started 3 years ago. The process of detoxification, from breaking down a cell to clearing things out, to making something new, to making new tissue, to disposing of and storing some of the residue, to then getting it out, that can be months to years of a process. And the snot and the head and the the achiness and the throat, that's the final part. That's why after we have a clean out, we go, oh, geez, I feel great. I feel like I've been cleaned out. That's a common response to having gone through a cold or flu.
Okay. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, so my little dog ears are going up. And that's, I think, because I'm thinking of a time when in Fort Collins, where we are from, Kat and I have lived, we have a CDC, one of the CDC labs, beautifully placed right underneath the dam, which I thought was wonderful. But I know people who work there, and one of their rules was, you know, when you're never, ever, ever rub your nose or touch your eyes, rub your eyes, because your eyes are one of the fastest ways to get something into your system, virus, bacteria. That is one of their rules. In fact, they are so intense with that they have signs everywhere that say, rub your eyes and die, because they literally can contract something that can kill them by rubbing their eye. So
they can get bacteria, but not a virus. They can also get chemicals. A lot of what's held in labs, because I've worked in a couple of labs, is very, very hazardous chemicals. And you definitely don't want to rub that in your eye. But you can't, I'll get to the virus in a minute, but a bacteria, yeah, you can. You absolutely can, because the membranes on the eyes are highly permeable, way more so than the skin. And certain parts of our skin is more permeable on the body than other parts of the skin. The feet, for example, are very absorbent. And so, well, a lot of the body is, but normally where there's a thinner membrane like the eyes, yeah. But having said that, if you have the right amount of bacteria around the eyes, that is your first line of defense. In our modern society, because we sterilize everything, we are actually taking away most of our first lines of defenses. And that's why even to this day, it's advised that you let babies put things in their mouth, because it's how they start to develop a recognition for and develop bacteria and their gut and their immune system. That's all bacteria. They need to develop it. So then we go sterilizing stuff, and most people are deficient in bacteria, in gut bacteria and in the external biome. They're deficient. So it makes us susceptible to a lot more than we used to be. Now with a virus is relevant to tissue. Remember, it's created, every virus can be, is specific to a specific cell tissue. So by its nature, it has to be created from within a tissue, which means that it has to have tissue to be active in. If there's no tissue, there's no virus. So this is why viruses aren't transmissible, because you can't take with any membrane, or even if you swallow into your digestive system, you can't get actual tissue into your bloodstream. It's impossible. It's literally impossible. The only way you can do it is by puncturing. And that's why the only way you can get any kind of virus put in your body, especially if it's from an animal or another person, is via an injection, via vaccine. But we can get to that. But the whole point is that the way that people curate a virus, for example, to make vaccines, is they grow it in animal tissue. It's not a bacteria. It doesn't just proliferate. You have to grow it. You have to incubate it. And it can only be done in tissue, specifically tissue that is weak and toxic and dying. That's how a virus is created. So you can't get that through the membrane of an eye. You can't even eat it, because if you eat a tissue that has a viral load, what happens? It goes into your mouth. You start getting enzyme action. Doesn't go anywhere because it's in your mouth. Now it has to go into your stomach that's full of hydrochloric acid. Everything just starts breaking down at that point. So what your body does from tissue is that it starts breaking it all apart. It breaks it down into its minute bit parts, and it extracts nutrients. It extracts enzymes, vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. But you don't get tissue go into your body. You don't get bits of pork or bits of baby, which is actually in vaccines. You can't get that into your bloodstream because it's a foreign tissue. The body won't allow it. If you get foreign tissue in your blood, you'll get anaphylactic shock almost immediately. You'll probably die. You'll get an extremely volatile, inflammation reaction, and you'll likely go into anaphylaxis. So that's why it's extremely important. That's why the body's set up the way it is, that we don't get foreign particles into the bloodstream. So anything that goes into the mouth, it's still not in the body till it's been extracted and absorbed and uptaken into the bloodstream. Mouth to anus is a tube. So technically it's outside of our body, right? It's inside of this structure, but it's not in our body. It's not in our intracellular fluid, our bloodstream, because it has to be extracted, brought through very, very small and thin membranes via way of co-nutrients and enzymatic action to bind to nutrients and go through the channels that in cell walls that'll open up. You can't get something that's a particle of tissue is too big. So you can't get a virus into your body. It can't go through cell membranes in your eyes, that protective mechanism, and it can't get in through your gut. The only way is to get it directly in there, which is by puncturing. And that's why vaccines were sold as the solution to a lot of things. And that's what's killed so many people, because that is the only way you can get foreign particles into the body.
Okay, so what about through the lungs?
Because no, you can't. No, the same thing. So the lungs are the same. You can breathe in particles, you know that, because you can breathe in dust, right?
Right.
You know,
you can breathe in, yeah.
But animal tissue, it had to be extremely small, and then even then it's still way too big to pass through the lining of the lung. Because the lungs go through many different parts of the lungs till they reach the alveoli, which are the small sacs, and that's which have capillary beds, which are the very small, the smallest kinds of red, you just call it arterial kind of, vessels. And then through there, that's where things get absorbed in and out, but only the smallest of particles, and only by way of, it has to be allowed. It doesn't just go in by an automatic process. It has to be allowed by a lock and key mechanism, essentially.
So can bacteria go through the lining go through your lungs?
They can, but they more go into the lung, and then they can take up residence in the lung. So if the lung is deficient, then it can have a bacterial infection in the lung. Yeah, you get bronchitis, you can get, right. But remember, you don't have to get it in, because you could be on a tropical island somewhere and you could get bronchitis. Right. You get bronchitis because you have a need to clean out the lungs, not because you sucked in bacteria to a healthy lung. You know, like we're surrounded by bacteria all the time. Why don't we have sore throats and things all the time? Because we're constantly breathing in and swallowing bacteria. It's only when our body is like, okay, we need more stuff going on here. Now we need this to happen. And that's when you get a sore throat. Otherwise we'd have constant sore throats. We'd always be sick. We wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't even be a species if bacteria and parasites and fungus and viruses were just this infecting micro world. Because how would we even be alive? Like, from a common sense perspective, why is it that we go through these only periodically when they're around us all of the time, literally all of the time, you know? So we have to start taking a more common sense approach and perspective to start figuring out and realizing how and why, which is actually what I did. Because when I studied traditional methods, and I was sure that we were infected by organisms for the first 25 years of my life. But when I was getting recurrent viral symptoms, I got colds 13 times in 1 year when I was 26. And then when I was 27, I just had recurring viral symptoms as well. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not giving them to anybody. And why? And then somebody like a naturopath or a doctor, they just try to sell me like an antiviral or this or that. And I'm going, yeah, but when I was in primary school, you told us viruses weren't alive. That's why a doctor would say, you got a virus. I can't give you an antibiotic or anything because you've got a virus. Yeah, right. I can't kill it. Like that, I remembered that from when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I'm thinking, but why are they saying something different now? So that's when I had to find other means. That's when I came across guys like Antoine Béchamp, and specifically Rudolf Steiner was the first guy that I researched, who was like late 1800s to early 1900s. And Paul Chek, who I learned a lot from, who's a contemporary holistic health practitioner, he learned a lot from Rudolf Steiner as well. So that's kind of like what led me down that road. And I was going, wow, what? Like, viruses aren't transmissible? I'm sure they are. You know, but I'm going, like, the real life scenarios aren't lining up with the theory. They're just not. I'm seeing too many holes in it. So then I go, okay, well, here's this alternative way of looking at things, which is actually centuries old. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm in a position where I'm so sick, I actually don't really care if I live or die. Like, although I do have a very positive outlook in things, when your life is sucked out of you, there's a lot of points where you're just like, it's just too hard. It's like, it's not like I willingly was going to go jump off a bridge, but I was also at that point where it's like, could go either way. I wasn't like attached to being alive anymore. It was just like, well, could go either way now. So therefore, what's a viral infection? So I thought, you know what? I am going to infect myself with a viral infection. I'm already prone to them. I've gone through like 15 in the last 2 years. So I'm going to do it. So I actually went around and I got people that I knew, and also from knowing the guys in the labs, and I got mucus, I got sweat, and I got saliva. And then I also had sexual contact with somebody that I knew had active viral activity. And I could not infect myself with a virus through saliva, sweat, mucus, or sexual activity. Couldn't do it. So because at the time I was like, well, this makes sense, but I'm not just going to believe it. I have to experience things before I know them to be true. And I literally could not infect myself with a virus, despite being prone to viruses at the time, and also in a state where I was more than okay with getting a virus, and it just didn't happen.
What about like herpes is a virus, all right?
Yeah, herpes is a virus, yeah, but it's not as transmissible as you might think. Again, it's like when people talk about genital herpes, for example, there are so many people that have slept with somebody else and haven't got the symptoms or haven't got the virus. And then just by common sense, though, remember, when we're all connected to a very close degree. So unless somebody is just a monogamous partnership from day one, or they're celibate, people are sleeping around, and it just by nature would spread to way more people than actually have those kinds of symptoms now. So that comes mostly from, it's a blistering of the skin. So there's volatile toxins under the skin. Why are they in that area? Well, that just depends on a lot of lifestyle histories and emotions and belief systems as well, that lead to where toxicity embeds in the body and why. And so when we have a clean out, like a blistering of the skin, that's literally just volatile toxins under the skin coming to the surface and getting cleaned out. But it's not transmissible, because I had contact with 2 people that had genital herpes, and I got tested multiple times afterwards, and to this day I've never had symptoms, and that was 10 years ago. But even doing recurrent blood tests for 2 years after that contact, nothing.
What about the people who do get that though, who are like, didn't have herpes, slept with somebody, now they have herpes, and that person was known to have herpes?
Yep.
They got it.
So that's what I was saying. That's got a lot to do with what's going on in the individual bodies and the way the bodies are talking to each other. Because if it was just purely infectious, everybody would get it. But it's not purely infectious because everybody doesn't get it. So then you say, well, why is it in isolated cases then? You have to just name it for what it is. It's isolated cases. Why in isolated cases does it appear that was transmitted? Well, remembering that we could be in the same room, and if our both bodies feel it's okay to undergo a cold or a flu, then we can both get that based on either each other or based on the environment around us. So we create our internal environment through way too many ways to list. It comes from a hereditary lineage from our ancestors. It comes from the way we were born, how much traumatic experience we had when we were born, the way our mother treated us, the way our nervous system developed based on her nervous system, the way we were fed, thoughts surrounding sexuality, for example. That all goes into, everyone knows the expression, the issues are in the tissues. So when we have issues go to a certain area, that creates a resonant energy in that area. Now, resonant energy can also be called a magnetic energy. Magnets, what magnetizes to an energy is organic minerals and metallic minerals. So if metallic minerals go to a certain area and store there, they're going to have to be detoxified from that area. So then if they need to be detoxified in a heavy way, that'll be a viral detoxification. And also, to be honest, a lot of what we're told is viral is actually bacterial. So there's a lot that we're lied to about as far as the symptoms that we experience and what they're really caused by. But the genital herpes, for example, because that comes up a lot, is mostly that. It's mostly it's a result of the environment that we've created. So if 2 people with a similar environment that talk to each other can go through a recognition of, hey, look, that's the way to clean this out, then the other body can recognize that the virus is only ever created internally, and then you get the blistering and things come through the skin, because that's all it is. It's volatile toxins under the first couple of layers of skin. That's all that is. That's all the action is. And that's why it's actually easy to take care of with things like foods, diet, lifestyle. Plenty of people clear up herpes and never get it again, because once you take away the reason that it's there, you don't get it again. Once you take away those metallic minerals, and once you take away the energetic blocks that might be there, you're not going to get herpes. That's probably one of the reasons I never got it when I was exposing myself to it, is because I just did not have a need for it. I don't have a built up toxicity around that part of my body, I guess. That's one way.
And it just sounds like there's a resonance. It's like, what I'm getting is that there's a resonance of your one body saying, oh, that's one way I could do that. Let's get our viruses in alignment to create that, because this will mirror that, and it's a way to take care of it. But there's also an emotional component. Like you're saying, there's many components for there to be a mirror resonance for you to create it within your own being. And we want to get to these questions for sure. We are going to like an hour and a half. But
yeah.
Linda, you go, Linda.
I was going to bring it in, tie in the questions, because one of the questions is very similar. It's for shingles and advice on dealing with shingles. Mm-hmm. And the recurrence of it. Is there something that someone can do?
Ask. Sorry if I mangled your name, Eleni.
Yeah. So with anything like that, look, to be honest, I can't really diagnose or give a thing for over air, and it's dangerous to take someone's advice just over the air like this anyway. But I'll give you a generic answer, and the generic answer is that actually all of the cures, so to speak, are always the same. It doesn't matter what whatever you've got, it's because you've got out of balance, and there's a reason that the symptoms are there. Shingles are usually actually even brought on after you've had a previous infection from another agent. So it's always the same. You've just got to clean out what's in the body that's causing the problems to be there. And that just comes down to some very simple practices and habits. Those habits being, make sure the food that you eat is all organic. Now, I know that people go, oh, well, I can't get it, or it's too expensive, but that's a choice as well. It's like, well, do you also have Netflix and a mobile phone? Why don't you give those away and eat organic food? It's like, most people do have the choice, but we don't make the choice. So you got to eat organic food, because you don't want to be taking in too many extra chemicals that are causing. You just don't know what's causing it. Because while you could take in plenty of pesticides, your biochemistry is different from mine. And maybe the slightest hint of smelling a pesticide, not even bringing it into my body, may set off all kinds of chemical reactions, and it gives me things like shingles or whatever it might be. So you don't know what it is. You have to minimize the amount of toxicity coming into the body, because those metallic minerals interfere with our own body's messages. It interrupts them. It also, we have receptor sites in the body, which are supposed to recognize nutrients and also enzymes and hormones. If those receptor sites are filled with heavy metals and metallic minerals, we don't get them. It's blocked. So our body doesn't know how to function. It discombobulates and it goes into weirdness. So our nervous system doesn't function, our digestive system doesn't function, and our neural system doesn't function. So then we end up with all kinds of symptoms and so-called diseases, but they all come fundamentally from the same thing. So it means be clean about what you put in your body. Make sure you move. You can't just be sedentary. The body has biological pumps, which are designed by nature to be pumped by movement. So you don't have to go out and go to the gym 8 days a week, but you do have to move. So just good, gentle movement. I recommend looking up Paul Chek on YouTube and looking at the working and breathing squat, or any of the primal pattern or infant development style movement patterns. They're gentle exercises, but good enough to get the body functioning the way it's supposed to. On top of that, it's getting enough sleep. Are you going to bed at 3 a.m. every day? Are you in sync with nature's cycles, your body clock, with the rhythms of the earth? Are you in sync with that? If you're not, then you are out of sync. And by nature, you are out of balance. You are going to get some kinds of symptoms in the body and the mind. And then with the mind, do you watch your mind? The mind I liken to a garden. It's like, you don't have to try to grow weeds. All you have to do is neglect your garden. It'll be full of weeds. You don't even have to try it. But if you want roses and apple trees and lemon trees, you have to plant them, you have to cultivate them, and you have to weed that garden so that they can take precedence. So we have to watch our mind and our thoughts and decide what it is that we create with our own thoughts and our own mind. And then, are we in touch with our emotions? Do we suppress them all the time? Do we react to our emotions all the time? Or do we have some kind of mastery over them and an appreciation of, where we actually allow them to be, but we don't let them run or rule us either? And then from a spiritualist perspective, it's like, what's our dream? Why are we here? We're all different. There's like 8 billion of us or whatever, but we're not all the same. And so what is it that we're creating that is slightly unique? Like all three of us might all do pottery and we make mugs, right? But there's plenty of mugs in the world, but it's like there's something unique about the way we'll do it that for a small number of people, or maybe a large number of people, are like, I just love Kat's mugs. There's something about them that speaks to me. Or Linda's mugs. It's like there's something about the color or the shape, or I can just feel it. She's put something into that gives me something, right? So that's like the spiritual thing. What are we creating? Why are we here? Because we're not here by accident. And if we're cut off from that, then we're also going to experience physical disharmony, because those are essentially the 4 main bodies that we're made up of. We have a physical body. Around that, we have a mental, an emotional body. Around that, a mental or a mind body. And around that, a spiritual body. The spiritual being the largest and most creative of the bodies, because we have to realize we think the physical body is creative because we can draw a nice picture or do a nice dance. But our physical body is just elements which don't animate themselves. That animation has to come from somewhere, comes from higher up through the field of bodies. So it's really the spiritual body that is animating through the mental body, which gives us a filter, the emotional body, which gives us the feeling, and then into the physical body. And so I know that's a generic answer, but if we're out of balance in any of those areas, we're going to find disharmony in the physical body.
Yeah, I think that's hugely powerful. There's Anthony Williams. He's a medical medium. He has a book about, like, I think it's called, I have the book actually, but there's so much to be said about everything is a reflection of what you're taking in. And if you have too many toxins that you can't take in well, you have to deal with those toxins. And that's where you want to really reach out to people who know what they're doing, because you can detox too quickly and kill yourself. So it's about being very mindful. Let's get into some of these questions here as well. Keep these questions moving. This question is from Michael. Is there something potentially helpful in dealing with gyno, Gyno? And I imagine maybe it's the same answer you just gave. I don't know what gyno is.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just, there's always going to be, like I say, it's too hard because you need to know somebody's history. That's what I don't like about a lot of modern like gurus and stuff. They just start giving out answers, but it's like, well, who are you? Like, how old are you? How long have you had the symptoms for? What's your history? Have you taken a lot of medications? Have you gone through a surgery? What's your diet like? What traumas happened in the last 5 to 10 years? Did you lose your parents? Did you break up with a loved one? Did you have a near-death experience? All these things you need to factor in before you can just say, just eat more apples or just drink more water, or, those are real blanket things which can be harmful if you don't know somebody's symptoms. So I guess, I'll just answer it the same way. It's like, you want to work at removing toxicity in the body. And I can just give you some generic advice for that, because the best foods for doing that are saturated raw fats. Obviously, if they're organic, raw organic fruits help. And then also specifically berries, raw organic berries help a lot. And then if you can make it yourself or buy it, which is hard to get, is raw organic coconut cream. Quite hard to make, or at least labor intensive, but depending on where you're in the world, you might be able to get some. That's a very strong solvent and detoxifier, but also protector of cells. So you can use that topically and internally, and it's very, very effective.
Coconut cream.
Yeah, but raw coconut cream, not if it comes out of a tin. Otherwise, you've absorbed a lot of tin as well. So
if it's on a pie, no. I'm like, that sounds delicious. Yeah. Okay, excellent. We'll keep going to these questions. This is from Jillian. You touched on the experience of using food as comfort / a crutch in the past and breaking out of those habits. Do you feel like we are being fed our illnesses and addictions from certain industries in order to keep us sick and carrying our lower vibrations? Thank you, Jillian. Great question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's an awesome question. And yeah, you've answered your own question. Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's absolutely true. And so here's my full answer to that is that everything there's no such thing as all good or all good or bad. Everybody knows the balance is always light within dark and dark within light and everything else. And so with that concept, I'll say my answer to it is yes. However, there's a balance point there, because when you take traditional cultural values. The flavors and the enjoyment of food is a big part of their spiritual practice and also their bonding as a community or a family. So yeah, we are fed certain ways and fed our diseases, but I was just going to give the example of when I needed to get into the most heavy detoxification periods in my life, the food was really very plain, like just eating raw meat by itself with raw butter on it, no flavoring, no nothing. And initially coming out of a lot of cooked foods and things with a lot of salt and flavors and things, you just go, oh, how could you do that? The food is so bland. But when you learn the true flavor of foods, you realize that you were actually fed the equivalent of crack in the flavorings and things of the food that you were eating. You were actually being fed your disease. So, but then the opposite of that, like I said, is that when you take, people in India or Sri Lanka, for example, or other parts of the world where they take natural flavor, like they've actually harvested, the spices and things themselves, process them themselves, and they start making the curry at like 10 in the morning for the 5 or 6 p.m. meal. It's a whole process. There's a lot of flavor in that. It's not like just eating a piece of celery stick by itself, It's like that's relatively flavorless, celery by itself, compared to a curry with all these magical flavors that have been alchemically produced throughout the day from various, but that's not feeding them their disease, So that's where the balance point is. It's like you can take anything and the intention behind it is what matters. And the intention behind feeding people their diseases is what comes from the establishment. If it's coming from the convenience side of things and that, then yes. But if it's coming from a heart-centered giving of sharing a culture, then I would say no, unless they've also bought into buying in canned stuff to make their food for people.
Okay. That is great. And then we got one more question from Jillian. Do you feel like low-fat diet, that the low-fat, oh my God, help me. Do you feel like the low-fat diet that adopted at one point contributed directly to your chronic fatigue? What is your take on high-fat diets such as keto? So does that make that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so low-fat was put out there to create disease. Low-fat was put in to create disease because, first of all, fats are used to produce hormones. They're essentially like cholesterol, for example. That's what we build hormones from. So it's really essential. It's actually essential for most bodily processes. Now, the low-fat diet also brought in alternative fats, not just low-fat, but alternative fats. Don't eat butter, it'll kill you. Eat margarine or eat canola oil. Eat these vegetable oils. Now, these highly processed polyunsaturated oils are actually the worst thing for the body. They downregulate heavily your cell metabolism, and they also coat cell membranes. And what that can do is lead to insulin resistance. So that's actually a primary cause of diabetes, is the polyunsaturated fats, and a lot of diseases, a lot of inflammatory diseases are caused from the polyunsaturated fats. Saturated fats, which have kept many cultures healthy for centuries, are only ever going to promote health and actually mitigate disease. So the low-fat culture was definitely what people call a psyop, which is designed specifically to start down-regulating people's physical production of hormones and therefore fertility and therefore enjoyment of life and everything else. And a ketogenic diet is, I don't like really diets because most diets are exclusive. They're like, I'm going to exclude that, I'm going to exclude that, and I'm going to exclude that. But realistically, if it's made by nature, it's like you should really just use some of your, intuition with that. And if you live in a climate or an area that grows more tropical fruit, a ketogenic diet doesn't want you to have tropical fruit, but there's a lot of benefits to tropical fruit. For example, papaya, pineapple, really high in enzymes, really high in minerals and other nutrients. So I wouldn't go living off that either, because that would be out of balance, but I wouldn't exclude it. So to answer your question, I think a ketogenic diet is better than a low-fat diet, but what's better than both is not having a diet and just eating according to nature's principles.
So that brings a question for me, is all of the people who are dealing with the saturated fats or the polyunsaturated fats that are coating the cells, dealing with metabolic problems, how do they cleanse their system to reset that?
Yeah, so I'm just making sure you're eating more saturated fats than unsaturated fats, getting that balance right. Now, the problem with unsaturated, they'll clear out over time. Vitamin E helps that, but you want to get that from natural food sources, not from supplements, because you take supplements and they're actually taken usually from industrial waste, and then they're packaged as a nutritional supplement. So vitamin E, actually, I think most of it got taken from Kodak or one of the film. So it's just a waste product of the film industry. And then they realized when they analyzed it in a lab that it was something like 30% similar to vitamin E, organic vitamin E. So that was enough for them to call it vitamin E. So that's how they got rid of, instead of having to dispose of a highly costly disposal process, they just started making supplements out of it. Same with most fish oils and things. They're all highly toxic and really bad for everything. So anyway, point being, eliminate those sources from coming in further. Up your intake of highly nutritious foods and saturated and preferably raw saturated fats. And over time, that will shift it in the body. It'll start moving it out. One of the best things you can do, though, to speed up that process is that these unsaturated fats, they harden in the body. Now, when they are room temperature, they're, how do I explain this simply? Well, essentially what happens is in our body, which is generally 37 degrees, right? But then also when we downregulate our metabolism, our body temperature drops to more like 36 or even 35 degrees. That's a downregulated metabolism in the body. Temperature drops. So what that means is that we're not even heating up to the right amount. Now, these polyunsaturated fats cool and harden at those temperatures. They need to be over around 40 degrees to be liquid. So that's after they've been metabolized, especially after being heated. So then what is a good practice is to have what's called lymphatic baths. And I learned about lymphatic baths from a guy called Ogenus Vonderplanitz, who wrote a book called We Want to Live. He's a raw food guy and a raw meat guy specifically, but he talks a lot about the ways that polyunsaturated fats can harden in the body, and they actually clog the lymphatic system. And that's why we can end up having a lot of issues, is that the lymph system, which is the waste removal system, but also a nutrient transport system, if that's blocked, that gives rise to so many problems in the body. So you can get lymph blockages from not moving enough. That's why some people use rebounders, you know, those little trampolines, and they rebound for 10 minutes a day. That gets the lymphatic system moving. But what you can do is take what's called lymphatic baths, which means either getting in a bath or a hot tub that's set at about 40 degrees centigrade, which is something like 105, 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and sitting in it for a minimum of 45 minutes. So what that does is it mimics a fever temperature. At 40 degrees centigrade, which is fever temperature, you get a lot of cell regeneration. That's why fevers and viruses and things aren't bad, because they actually also lead to regeneration. So we get a lot more nutrients circulating at that temperature and a lot of regeneration happening in the cells. The other thing it does is it will melt down hardened fats at that temperature. 40 degrees, it'll start melting it down, which means that it can be moved through the lymph system and get moving again. It can move a sluggish lymphatic system and detoxify the body by that way. So that's another thing that we can do. So it's a long-term process, you know. If you spent 30 or 40 years pummeling all the unsaturated fats, hey, well, that's just how it is, you know. It's just how it is. But from today, you can start to reverse that. It might take a few years, but every day will be better than the one before it. And so that's essentially the process for that. I don't think there's a fast way to do that.
That's great. What is this about raw meat? Eating raw meat?
Yeah, it's very regenerative. That's one of the things that helped me recover a lot of my strength that I lost, was eating raw meat, well, basically raw foods in general, raw fats, raw eggs, raw meats, and then
Don't you? There's back to like raw chicken. You eat like there's so many things that like, you eat that
salmonella.
Thick.
Yeah. Okay. So that's well. I only brought that up inadvertently, but this is a perfect way to illustrate the whole germ thing, right? Because you think you die, you think you get salmonella and you die. Here's the thing with raw foods. Raw foods are coated with bacteria, okay? They just are, but so are we. So is every food. What happens is that nature, like I said earlier, it's not out to kill us. Nature has signals that it gives us and we give it. Now, one of the ways we can tell whether a food is okay is the olfactory sense. So if we get a raw food and we smell it and it's like, oh, geez, you can't even hold it near your face, that's nature telling you that the bacterial content is too high for your body to handle. bear in mind that's going to be different between all three of us. That's why you see some people eating hugely pungent foods and you're like, how are they good? Like, why are they okay? Because you smell it and you're vomiting from the smell, right? But they're just shoveling it in their mouth. It's because our own biomes are all different. So that's how our body knows. Now, when you cook a food, the bacterial levels can get 60 to 100 times higher on that food before it will create a pungent odor. So let's say the bacterial levels were like 1 part per 100 in a raw food, and it's starting to get, oh, that's a smell. I can smell it. That's off. But in a cooked food, that can be 600 to 1,000 parts per million, or parts, whatever the unit I gave before it'll start giving an odor. So therefore, that can be 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 times higher in harmful bacteria than the raw food, and you won't smell anything. So you'll eat that thinking it's fine, but it's already way over what your body can handle. And that's why when you see food poisoning cases, it's all in cooked or undercooked food, not in purely raw food. Also, salmonella and E. coli, which people are scared about in eggs, chicken, whatever, like I said earlier, they are necessary, not only necessary, but vital for breaking down food and to giving nutrients to the brain and the spinal cord. They're essentially the neural network. Without them, we don't function. It's only when they get out of balance. Remember before I was talking about the dysbiosis, too high, too low. So if they're in balance, our body needs it. If they're way way above balance and way overboard, that will cause some harm to our body, but it's not necessarily harm. It's just that we might get the runs or vomiting, but those are essentially really just the fastest way the body can detoxify is to throw up. The slow way is to dump toxins into the stomach, and it comes out through the digestive system and comes out in feces and urine. That's the slow way. The fast way is to throw up. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, you can die from dysentery if you're continually vomiting and getting diarrhea, but that's because of something else. You'd have to, too much to go into now. But generally, you can stop those things. You can take clays. There's certain foods that'll absorb that sort of stuff and stop that from happening, so you don't die from it. But generally, it's because you've got a massive dysbiosis in the body.
Okay. All right. This is fantastic. I'm not going to eat any raw meat anytime soon. I'll have to have another conversation with you about that one-on-one another time. We can rub our beard biomes together and have a conversation about that. But what I want to also talk about is the empowerment piece and how being able to tap our true potential. Because before we go, and it's going to be a 2-hour conversation. That's just how it is. It was not planned. But I would like you to speak to the whole thing about how our genetics can give us this ability to do so much. The chemicals in our bodies can do so much. What is our potential? What did you see as our potential? What have you experienced as your own potential when you stepped outside of the paradigm that was given to you?
Well, I'm still finding that out. I think every time I've stepped outside, I find something I didn't think was there. And because that's happened numerous times, I just go, well, it must be infinite. Like that potential that we all have must be infinite. I think the only reason that we don't find that potential is because we don't look for it or embody or embrace it. We don't believe in it. We have too many self-sabotaging programs in us, like not worthy, not good enough, not whatever. Even a lack of faith that we're just here by accident or whatever, and we're just a meat sack, and that's it. That's the end of the story. And a lot of that, a lot of the ingrained belief systems and programs that we run. For me, though, it's a lot to do with the choice. Are we choosing to embrace and define the potentialities that exist within and around us? Or are we happy being in that matrix world of, I just earn some money so I can pay my rent and go to work and go on holidays once a year, and that's it, go to the pub on the weekends and watch TV. And then, how much are we really actively choosing our lives? So for me, it's an effort, but I actively choose everything that I do, everything that I eat, everything that I drink, everything that I do, like when I'll sleep and how and all that sort of stuff. I actively choose it. I don't just go, I'm just going to get whatever for dinner and eat it while I watch TV. It's just not part of my life. So, but for a lot of people, that is their life. So we're all choosing what we're experiencing. So it's also a choice really to embrace or embody or to find that potentiality. And I really think that it's limitless. I think we have, I don't know, like, what would you call it? Evidence all around us of these potentialities of people that have just snapped overnight or have got struck by lightning or something, and all of a sudden you can play piano or whatever. It's just like all these phenomena that exist. It's just, this is showing us the potentialities that exist around us, which are really within us, that just need to be turned on. And that's really also the area of epigenetics, is that the coding that's within our DNA can be switched on and off based on our experiences, based on environmental influences and factors, and based on our belief of ourselves and what we want to actually achieve and experience. So really, that's not, I don't really have any direct advice, except to say that for me, for my experience, it was really getting an understanding of the energies that I was putting out and what I was taking in. So being very selective about foods, the type of liquids I would consume, any information that I'm exposed to. Not only the content of the information, like what's this guy or girl talking about, or what's this movie about, or what's this music about, but the medium of information, because information is coded within light, sound, and water. And so when we're experiencing it, we're not just experiencing the song or the movie or the drink that we're drinking. We're experiencing whatever energetic memory or code of information is in that, which is all an unconscious thing. It only talks to the body. It doesn't talk to the mind. So then we have to go, well, what is it that we're being exposed to? What information? So I'm very selective about what comes into me, as well as what I'm putting out. And then the other thing is a very strong connection to nature, like really getting into nature as much as possible and feeling the earth and looking, especially, I don't know if people have really tried or experienced it, but normally when the sun's not so bright, if you can develop some of your peripheral vision where you don't look directly at, say, I've got trees out here that I'm looking at. If you don't look directly at a tree, you look just kind of through it almost, or just to the side, or the same like you can do with a person. And then you'll actually start seeing the energetic field that's around them. And you can see it as like, sometimes it looks like flames coming off, and it's really subtle. It's like the same color as everything else, but it's just like there's a shape there. And then same as you'll see it around people. And then so that's just getting more tapped into that energetic realm or frequency that surrounds all living things, including rocks and things like that as well. They all each have an energy. And then through that, we can start to really get an idea of where things are in how we fit into it all. And then through that, we can start getting a real sense of the, what we're capable of. What you're saying, the possibilities. What are the possibilities? And I think that the possibilities are infinite. What is our potential? But I think that the potential is only limited by how we limit ourselves.
Well said. All right, excellent. Linda, do you want to grab those last two questions that Jillian just popped in?
Sure. So we have, and then I think we'll have to stop on the questions because
we'll have to wrap it up there. I know that Miss Linda's got things she's got to do.
Yeah, so RR would like to hear some tips on how to best naturally clear away potential gunk, I'm assuming cholesterol, in arteries. Please.
Yeah, sure. So anything that is a solvent, that raw coconut cream, but you've got anything that is an acidic-based fruit. So grapefruit, limes, lemons, things like that. If you increase the amount of those that you have, especially first thing in the day, and then add it to your water that you drink throughout the day, that can help to break down old plaque, specifically lemons and limes, great for that. And then your solvent action, raw fats, and just raw fats in general. Avocados, if you can get, raw dairy is hard to get unless you know people, but unpasteurized butter and cream is really good. Otherwise, raw coconut cream, if you can get it or make it, or just go with avocados. Raw eggs as well. If you can get a couple of raw eggs in a day, that's really good. Either just put them into a glass and drink them like Rocky did in his movies, or you put them in a smoothie. You can't even taste them. You can't tell that there's eggs in there. So those all help.
I was going to say, how about things like making your own raw cashew milk and things like that? Is that the right kind of fat?
The cashews aren't really saturated fat though. The only nuts that are going to give you the saturated fat are well, kind of none of them actually. But they're more tipped in the favor of the unsaturated fats, but they're not bad for you. It's just I wouldn't take too many of them if you're because the cholesterol thing and the hardened arteries and things like that, that's really an issue of needing more solvents in the body. Okay. And then up in the saturated fat, which also helps to clean arteries. That's a funny thing. We're told that those are the things that kill us and clog arteries, but it's not. That's the hardened bad fats. The trans fatty acids have hardened. That's what happens there. So increasing raw saturated fat and then increasing solvent foods. Apple cider vinegar is great for that too. Lemons, limes. That's about the best I can give you just from on a podcast.
So for those that don't know, saturated fats real quick, can you?
Oh yeah, so saturated fat is usually they're animal based, some plant based. Actually olive oil is really good too, as long as you don't cook with it. Olive oil is really good. Coconut oil is good. Then you've got avocados, eggs, the fats from meats, dairy fat, coconut and coconut fats and creams. And a little bit of nuts is fine as well. That's all okay.
And everybody,
avocado, I didn't say that one.
avocado, you said?
Yeah.
And just again, everybody do your research. Like Tom's giving you all this information. If it resonates true, do your research. If it doesn't resonate true, do your research. Like, dig in and research alternative sources as well, and empower yourself, because that's what, that's the essence of Tom's message, is empower yourself and choose from a place of being connected and choose from a place of personal liberation, because you did the work to get you there. Any last words that you want to share with the people, Tom? Any last thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just reiterate what you said. It's like, it's one of the reasons that I don't usually like just giving out answers and stuff, is because the answers are only really relevant to an individual who, for one person, it might make a lot of sense and be the right answer. For another, it's just not. And so it's really disempowering, I think, to tune into a podcast and just expect to get answers, because you're asking for something outside of yourself. You didn't really go and create that answer for yourself. So I like giving out information because I like opening new avenues of thought in an individual. I like it when people go, you know what, I never considered it from that perspective. Now a new avenue of thought has opened up and I can pursue that or not, but I like it when people decide, hey, that's opened my mind. My mind's now more open than it was before. And I don't necessarily believe all of that. Just like me, I didn't believe terrain theory when I first came across it for a couple of years. I had to do a lot of extra research and I had to experiment on myself before I was like, okay, yeah, all right. That's a core fundamental truth for me now, but it took a couple of years. Same with a lot of things, so that's all I want to give people or encourage people to take is, if your mind can be opened and remain open, then that's a gift for you, because that's empowering you in your own life.
Excellent. All right. Anything last from you, Linda?
I think that everything that we can do to empower ourselves for our own health, that's what helped me when I went to doctor after doctor and didn't receive help. I just kept searching. And I think that's important for everyone. There's a place for doctors. There's a place for asking questions. And I would always find doctors that were willing to have me ask the tough questions. And so whatever you're doing on your journey, make sure that you take control of that. You're the one, it's your body. It's important, whether it's, whatever that condition is, that you do the research, you look for different avenues, and you actually look for things that challenge your own beliefs. Because that's the best way for you to get out of your own bubble and get out of the regular bubble and start finding your answers. And I do totally believe the mind, body, soul connection. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Perfect. That's excellent. All right. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jillian. And thank you, everybody who showed up and asked questions. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream because we're literally at 2 hours. So bless everybody. Be good to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be kinder to others. Take care.